My older siblings and I all graduated from the Volksschule, the Jewish People's School in Montreal. In those days, there was no such thing as a coordinated curriculum. Quite the opposite. There was a world of difference between the image of childhood we were taught in English and the image of childhood we were taught in Yiddish. In English, we read about Dick and Jane going up the hill to fetch water. In Yiddish, we read about boys cooped up all day in a place called the Cheder. In English, there was something called Sunday school. In Yiddish, it was Cheder 24/6, where all they studied was Chumash, and it looked something like this. This is from Laughter Through Tears, a Soviet-era silent film made on location in Ukraine. When it comes to depicting the poverty and starkness of Jewish life before the revolution, the film achieves almost documentary precision. You see 20 to 30 children all crammed together around a table, reciting the same thing out loud, as the Rebbe, more comical than sinister, looks on. The Cheder boys are much more watchful of the Rebbe than they are of the Chumash in front of them. In English, boys and girls had pets to play with. As the first of my siblings to grow up watching television, I had a special affection for a female collie dog named Lassie. In Yiddish, so far as we knew, the best you could hope for were a few goats. And instead of grazing in the pasture, Yiddish goats fed on the thatched roofs of Jewish homes. But Yiddish had something that English didn't: the stories for children by Sholem Aleichem. Not only did we enjoy these stories, but they also inspired the imagination of Soviet filmmakers, like the Ukrainian-born Grigory Cherikover, to whom we owe Laughter Through Tears. We love these stories for at least 3 reasons. They placed children center stage. Most everything else we read in Yiddish was about grown-ups: tailors, seamstresses, carpenters, porters, market women, shop workers, starving yeshiva students, and a few exemplary rabbis. These child-centered stories mostly took place during the Jewish holidays, and together these stories, more than anything else, made the past come alive for us. Our teachers loved them because they also served a didactic purpose. They taught Menschlichkeit and Yiddishkeit, which is to say, everyday ethical behavior and Jewish customs and beliefs. They inoculated us against unforeseen disasters. Even though we grew up in Canada where nothing bad ever happened, this was something our teachers and parents knew would come in handy later in life. These stories, in short, were life in miniature, but life as only Sholem Aleichem saw it, a tragic comedy for children of all ages. Sholem Aleichem discovered the subject of childhood in 1886, when he was 27 years old and still living in Bielec Cerkov. That means just before he moved to Kiev. On one feverish night, he authored Das Messerl, The Penknife, a silly but sad story from my childhood. It was a breakthrough on many levels. It was overtly autobiographical. It was tightly scripted, with a dramatic plot and a great cast of characters. The action moves between the boy's home, where his sickly father is an innkeeper, and the boy's cheder, run by a sadistic teacher whom the boys call Motye Malach HaMoves, Motye the angel of death. It's the story of a little boy who transgresses against his father by playing with and later stealing a penknife. And finally, it entered that heart of darkness called the cheder. Sholem Aleichem's animus toward the cheder was shared by all the maskilim, modernizers, social reformers of his generation. They hated everything it stood for. The boys cooped up indoors for hours on end. Corporal punishment meted out for any infraction. The rote repetition, the system of word-for-word translation. There was no instruction in Hebrew grammar. It was a classical curriculum that hadn't changed in centuries and was age inappropriate. Little thought was given to child development, and there was no such thing as teacher accreditation. So to invent a Jewish childhood that remained true to the past, Sholem Aleichem therefore had to confront the painful legacy of the cheder. So this is the pivotal scene which takes place in the cheder of Motye Malachamovis. A poor orphaned boy is accused of stealing pennies from his mother's charity box, and all the boys are forced to participate in his public shaming. In this Soviet version, a cheder boy named Dovidel is an exemplar of social solidarity, and he will stand up for his classmate. In Sholem Aleichem's more truthful telling, the other boys are eager to join in the punishment. Either way, the Rebbe is undeterred, and in a wonderful piece of Soviet cinematography, as you will soon see, the tzitzis of the Rebbe's Arba Confess get entangled in his leather belt. This piece of visual satire, well, let's see. This is the Dovidel sequence, and Dovidel demurs. He won't tattletale, okay? He wants to stand up for his friend. All well and good. Yes. But it's of no use because the Rebbe will mete out the punishment nonetheless. And here we see him getting himself prepared, pulling out his belt, and we see the belt all entangled with his Arba Confess. Right, a piece of visual satire which would have brought a smile to the young Sholem Aleichem. Okay, so what happens next in the story, but not on film, is that our hero, watching this trial, is so overcome with guilt over his own much more serious act of theft, known to himself alone, that he rushes home and has what we would call a nervous breakdown. How to convey the emotional turmoil of a child? How to convey the inner world of the Jewish child? So here I think Sholem Aleichem faced his greatest artistic challenge. How as a writer could he capture a world of dreams and nightmares and fantasy, a world steeped in the mythic past? For Solomon Rabinovich was a child of the Enlightenment. Enlightenment stood for scientific knowledge, rational discourse, historical awareness, progress, Western culture. Standing in their way were the arcane customs and beliefs of shtetl life. Standing in their way was the modern, secular Jew who no longer lived in the world of myth and no longer believed in it. How could a 27-year-old maskil bring that world to life? By creating characters who did, by returning once more to the shtetl, and by animating the story through the celebration of the Jewish holidays. On the Jewish holidays, The great myths of creation, revelation, and redemption came alive through ritual objects and local custom. The holiday cycle of building a sukkah, buying an esrog, dancing with a flag on Simchas Torah, leading the children through Hakofas, lighting candles and playing cards on Hanukkah at night, delivering shalach manos on Purim, or putting on a play at the Purim afternoon feast, and above all, preparing for and celebrating the Seder. It was on these communal and familial occasions that the ordinary Jew, rich or poor, male or female, young or old, experienced the transcendent power of Jewish myth. On the Jewish holidays, every adult became a child again. Which holidays in particular? The national holidays, Hanukkah and Pesach, the carnivalesque holidays, Simchas Torah and Purim, the nature-based holidays, like Shavuos and Lag Bomer. These happened not in heaven, but here on earth. You could eat them, touch them, smell them, drink them. They were radically egalitarian. They were not the province of rabbis, rebbeim, male chassidim, yeshiva bochers. Sholem Aleichem's children's stories became hugely popular and redefined the meaning of Jewish myth for modern times by conjuring up a Judaism that was equally accessible to all, by turning the calendar of festivals into folk celebrations, which in turn joined two disparate realms, the spiritual and the material, to create what may be called a myth of the mundane. Childhood was like the holidays, yoking together two disparate realms. Children were both vulnerable and resilient, constrained, limited, but also mobile, quick on their feet, naive and wise, joyous and sad. So in 1900, Sholem Aleichem gave birth to a new kind of story for and about children. These he began to publish in the pages of Der Yid, the same Zionist-sponsored newspaper where he gave the world Kasrilivke. These Meises für jüdische Kinder were stories about the lives of Jewish children in the shtetl, and stories written specifically for Jewish parents to read to their children. They were the first comedy of childhood in the Jewish literary imagination. Children, I'm going to tell you a story about a flag. How a poor boy like me got a flag for Simchas Torah. How hard I came by it and how I was destined to lose it. Gott hat mich gestraft. Ich hab sie ausgekränkt. God punished me. I paid for it dearly. In this inaugural story called The Flag, Sholem Aleichem already has all the key elements firmly in place. A lyric, sentimental plot, an adult narrator looking back on his childhood in the shtetl, and a hook to the Jewish holidays. The voice we hear is no longer that of Sholem Aleichem, narrating, as it were, from the road, reporting as one adult to another on the recent foibles of his fellow Kasrilivker. Instead, the story's narrator is a grown-up letting go of his past, someone talking to a group of children from the safe remove of time and place. Not to keep his young audience guessing, he begins with a plot summary that gives away the ending. Actually, two endings. On a personal level, how hard he came by this flag and how easily he lost it. And on a moral ethical plane, how the loss of this flag felt like a punishment from God. Without further ado, he then throws us into the action by means of comic dialogue. But before I take you there, a trigger warning is in order. Today, it is absolutely forbidden to ridicule a child with disabilities. Not only does our child protagonist have a thin and squeaky voice, which earns him the derogatory nickname Kopele Kukariku, mimicking the sound of a rooster, but he also has a speech impediment, which turns every K into a T and every G into a D. Thus, he's saddled with a nickname that is doubly parodic, Topale Tutaretu. This same disabled little boy already made a cameo appearance in Sholem Aleichem's story of the penknife. Why then is it permissible for me to read you this story? And why did our teachers in the Volksschule do so as well? Because Kopele himself is the narrator. Having outgrown his disability, he can now pronounce all the sounds, and having survived this childhood trauma, he has wisdom to spare. Some of my best friends were stutterers. This story taught me never to make fun of them. As a teacher, parent, and grandparent, I personally vouch for this story. When I was a small boy like you, I was called Topele Totro, that is, Kopele Cockro. Why? Because first of all, I had a thin, squeaky voice, like a young rooster who has just begun crowing. And secondly, I could not pronounce K or G. And as if on spite, my father was named Kalman, my mother Gittel, my Talmud Torah teacher Gershon the Chicken Gullet from Galaganyevka, and I was known as Koppel Gittel Kalman's son. Sonny, what's your name?
Who, me? Toppel Gittel Kalman's son.
Louder.
Toppel Gittel Kalman's son.
Still, can't hear you. I yell out loud.
Toppel Gittel Kalman's son!
And who's your teacher?
My teacher, Gershon the Chicken Gullet from Galaganyevka.
And everyone burst out laughing. Everyone laughed, and I cried. I cried not because people laughed, but because they beat me. Everyone under the sun thought it a good deed to beat me. My father, my mother, my sisters, my teacher, my classmates, they all tried to get me to talk properly. Wow, well, so this is how the shtetl deals with deviant behavior. This is how it does speech therapy. When beating the child doesn't do it, the teacher comes up with a throat separator and orders all the pupils to spit into Kopele's mouth. But before this can happen, Ziama, the joiner who lives under the same roof, steps in with a much more pedagogical approach. Why are you tormenting this poor child? What has he done? Just give him to me for a minute, and I'll have him talking properly in no time. Reb Ziama then beckoned to me, held my chin, and said, "Look me in the eye, my boy, and repeat after me, word for word." He then has Kopele repeat a famous line from the liturgy. Otz koitzeitz ben koitzeitz ketzutzai lekatzeitz. This was written by the medieval poet Kalir to delight the ear with the musicality of the Hebrew language. But each of these words is impossible for Kopele to pronounce. So, when Kopele botches that, Ziama gives him an easier passage from the book of Psalms. Yoimaim hashemesh lo yakeka v'yoreach baloila. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. But there's that K sound again. Kopele fails miserably at both these ornately worded passages and he is written off as a lost cause, a basket case. You can't teach him anything. Like Sesame Street of old, which had one message for children and another for their parents, Sholem Aleichem wanted his adult readers to remember why they left the shtetl. Not enough that a child with disabilities was the object of ridicule, beatings, and torture. He was punished for not being able to mimic the holy gibberish and sacred sounds. Cheder education had turned 3,500 years of Hebrew poetry into tongue twisters. The measure of proper educated speech was the rote repetition of unpronounceable and incomprehensible words. Because Coppola was considered unteachable, a carpenter thought he could do a better job than a teacher. The Cheder, in other words, had turned classical Judaism either into torture or into child's play. Either way, Jewish children were thrust into a very harsh environment, especially if they were born dirt poor. In those days, owning a flag for Simchas Torah, I mean a flag in the full sense of the word, a lit candle in an apple, and the apple on the flag, was such bliss, such joy, I hardly dared dream about it. There were other treats aplenty to dream about. Why, there were some boys in school who had money for penknives, purses, and little canes. There were those who ate candy and cracked nuts every single day. Not to mention bagels and pancakes. My goodness, there were even those who ate white loaf, not only on Sabbath, but on weekdays as well. What luck! Oh, children, I've never ever tasted white loaf on weekdays. I was happy if I had my fill of black bread, for we were, God spare you, such a bitter lot, a bunch of impoverished paupers, despite the fact that everyone in the family worked his fingers to the bone. Father, may he rest in peace, was the assistant shamus of the basement prayer room annex of the butcher's synagogue. Mother, God rest her soul, was an expert at baking honey cakes, and my sisters mended socks. Believe me, I never once had the feeling of being full. There wasn't a meal which I couldn't have begun all over again. Even though it later turns out that Coppola and family are residents of Kasrilivke, happy paupers, they are not. They sooner belong to a story by Dickens. How exactly can our Coppola achieve his strategic goal of owning a flag in the full sense of the word? All the odds are stacked against him. Coppola belongs at the very bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. His father is an Unterschamus, an assistant shamus in an untersten Kleisel, in the basement prayer room annex von der Katzowischer Klois of the butcher's prayer house. Coppola's hereditary place on the social ladder is unter. Okay, so what's the story? The story proper begins, as does Tevye the Dairyman, Menachem Mendel, and so many other stories by Sholem Aleichem, when Coppola has one stroke of good luck. I quote, "This happened during Purim. Father sent me to distribute the Purim sweet platters among the members of the basement prayer room annex of the butcher's synagogue. One of my older sisters usually had this job, but now I was getting bigger. My father said it was time for me to make myself useful. So I went from house to house, carrying a saucer and some fruit cuts, which I distributed among the members of the basement prayer room annex of the butcher's synagogue. I slogged through the cold, slippery muck with my bare feet and changed the small coins I was given into a 40 kopek silver piece, and I still had 4 kopecks left over." This turns the story into a mini Bildungsroman. Now, that he's old enough to deliver Shalach Monas, he can begin to earn some spending money. And with money come all the seductions and moral complexities of adult life. Coppola is socialized to know that every person is born with competing impulses. An id, called the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, and a superego, called the Yetzer Tov, or good impulse. "What'll you keep in the purse?" asked the good impulse. "Your poverty?" "Buttons," said the bad impulse. "You'll stuff your purse with buttons. Everyone will think it's money, and then all the kids will be jealous of you." "What good'll that do you?" said the good impulse. "Listen to me. Distribute the money among the poor. Give it to charity, and you'll get credit for a pious deed. Some of the paupers are starving, poor souls." "Paupers?" The bad impulse turned to me. "You yourself are a pauper, son. You yourself are always hungry. Everybody's always generous with the next fellow's cash. Why didn't anyone ever give you anything when you were broke?" So this is comic dialogue at its best, which only proves that someone with a speech impediment knows how to compensate by talking to himself. Coppola's internal debate ends in a draw until the next act, a dramatic face-off in Cheder with Yulik, the rich boy. Yulik is not just the son of a rich man. He's a chip off the old block, a crafty, tight-fisted merchant in the making. Yulik begins stalking his classmate the moment he smells money. He knows all the tricks of the trade, how to get something for nothing, how to win Coppola over by talking Jew speak. Now, here is my voiceover as you watch the silent version. "Would you like to swap?"
"Swap," I said. "Swap what?"
"I'll also give you my penknife," he said. "You know, my white knife, don't you? It's the best there is. There's none better to be had." Wow, what a question. Did I know Yulik's knife? Who didn't? I'd be envious of it long enough. How often had I seen it in my dreams?
"Well, but what about me?" I said. "What do you want me to give you?"
"You?" said he. "Give me that silver 40 kopek piece." "Do it," said my bad impulse. "It's a dream of a knife. All the kids will be green with envy." I was about to take out the coin, but caught myself at the last minute.
"You're some wise guy," I said. "For 40 topets, I can buy a brand new knife."
"Like mine?" said Yulik. "Nonsense. Wait a minute. You know what? I'll throw in half a dozen pure bone buttons."
"For money," I said, "one can buy 10,000 dozen bone buttons."
"Aren't candy and nuts worth money? I swear to you, as I am a Jew, I'll give them all to you. And all you have to do is ask. Here, I've also got an iron nail. See? I'll give it to you free. See what kind of nail this is?"
"What do I need nails for?"
Finally, Yulik pulls out all the stops and tries to seduce Coppola with symbols of religion. "I'll let you pray from my siddur. I'll let you try on my Sabbath hat." As a last resort, he becomes a preacher of pieties, anything to wheedle that 40 kopek piece out of him. But Coppola holds his own. Seeing that he's run out of things to barter, Yulik gives Coppola a piece of his mind, demonstratively hands the nail to Nehemiah, a poor lame boy, as a present, and becomes Coppola's sworn enemy. There's a dark side to Sholem Aleichen's humor, as our teacher Dan Miron has taught. The dark side is not only the gathering storm of Jew hatred emanating from the capitals of Europe, West and East, as in Dreyfus and Kostrelivka, but also the moral corruption within a class-ridden and imploding society. Just as the Bes Medrash, the study house, functioned as the moral battleground in the Kasrilivka stories, so the Cheder functions in the stories for children. It is a microcosm of the adult world. Thankfully, in the stories for children, this battle is mostly internalized, as the two impulses fight it out in lively Yiddish dialogue. After his encounter and blow-up with Ulik, Coppola resolves to save his allowance for what really matters, an important lesson for children everywhere. Each season, however, has its festivals and expenditures. Come spring, there is Lag BaOmer, when every child is expected to contribute money, food, or munchies to the annual picnic. Everyone, that is, but he, who is always included out of pity as a charity case. This year he resolves to erase the shame of the past by contributing 1/4 of a ruble to the kitty. Come summer, he overcomes his evil impulse and doesn't buy summer fruits. After summer, at long last, comes the fall. Sukkot finally came, thank God, and I bought myself a large, yellow, two-sided flag. Painted on one side were two beasts with cat-like faces, lions really with open mouths. Their long tongues were decorated with some sort of whistles, apparently ram's horns. For the biblical phrase, with trumpets and ram's horn, were printed next to the lion. And beneath them were the lines, the flag of the tribe of Judah and the flag of the tribe of Ephraim. And that was only one side of the flag. The reverse side was even prettier, for it had true-to-life portraits of Moses and Aaron. Moses wore a large visor on his forehead, and Aaron had a golden hoop over his yellow shock of hair. Between Moses and Aaron stood a host of Jews, crammed in tight against one another and holding Torah scrolls in their hands. They all looked alike, as though one mother had had them. All wore the same long gabardines, belted below the hips, and the same socks and shoes. And they all seemed to step forward and sing, "Be joyous and merry" on Simchas Torah. Coppola must have bought a multicolored deluxe version of the flag you see on the screen, which was printed in Ukraine in 1900 and combines on one side much of the same iconography. His Cheder education deserves some of the credit because he can decipher the Hebrew words without nikud, Degel Machane Yehuda, Degel Machane Ephraim, and Sisu v'Simchu b'Simchas Torah. Etched in the child's memory forever is the zany combination of myth and the mundane, that is, the stuff of folk iconography, a mixture of the sublime and the ridiculous, ferocious lions that look like cats, Moses and Aaron dressed in fantastical garb, the Israelites turned into a parade of Hasidim with their distinctive dress, ancient past and everyday reality in a single temporal plane. A Simchas Torah flag, in the full sense of the word, must have a stick, a candle, and an apple. Once in possession of his coveted flag, Coppola heads to Ziama the joiner to carve him a stick, which allows Ziama to be redeemed in our eyes as a better carpenter than he was a pedagogue. This leaves the wax for a candle that will go on top of the apple. And here we need a brief reminder of the laws of kashrut. Coppola must get his hands on real wax and not tallow, called chalev, which is a non-kosher substance. Tallow dripping on the apple would render it treif. When it came to wax, I had more of it than any other kid. In fact, if anyone wanted a bit of wax, who did he come to? Me! For, after all, my father was the assistant shamus of the basement prayer room annex of the butcher's synagogue, and whatever remained of the Yom Kippur memorial candles belonged to him. That was his income. He melted them and turned them into Hanukkah candles, Saturday night Havdalah candles, and plain wax tapers. Whatever was left over from the latter, he gave to me. That was my income. The shtetl we learn from this unusually rich passage is a culture of poverty where nothing is allowed to go to waste. Through Koppele, Sholem Aleichem teaches us a lesson in recycling, a lesson in what may be called sacred ecology. Plot-wise, nothing much is happening, yet everything is becoming illuminated. Armed with what he imagines to be the most beautiful flag, with an apple redder than all the rest, and a candle the biggest of all, Koppele falls into a reverie and rehearses in his mind what is about to happen. The once-a-year communal festivity, when girls and young women are allowed to mix with the menfolk. The tensions between rich and poor temporarily melt away, and the Torah scrolls do the rounds of all the houses of prayer. Now, all these above-mentioned synagogues, houses of study, and prayer houses were not scattered helter-skelter over town, like in the big city of Yehopitz. That was one wonderful thing about Kasrilivke. In our town, all the synagogues were located in one section of the same street, practically in one courtyard, known as the synagogue courtyard, in Yiddish, the Schulhof. Koppele seizes this opportunity to sing the praises of Kasrilivke. Nowhere but in the shtetl do so many Jews and so much Yiddishkeit converge into so small a space. Turns out that the kid with the squeaky voice and the speech impediment has expert knowledge of communal prayer and study. Turns out that amidst the cacophony of sounds, he can distinguish the chanting from the singing, the reciting from the responding, and the rejoicing from the mourning. In fact, our entire synagogue courtyard could have been considered one big house of worship. Summertime, when the windows are open, a passerby heard so many different prayers wafting down, he didn't know what to do first. To stop and raise his heels 3 times for thrice holy is the Lord of hosts, to bow down for bless the Lord, or to answer Amen to a mourner's prayer. At one and the same time, the passerby could hear various parts of the service. While one worshiper said, "Then Moses sang," and another shouted, "Hear, O Israel," a third suddenly chimed in with a Talmud chant. When a generalization requires a specification, or when a specification requires a generalization. A fourth intoned, "Glorified and sanctified be God's great name," and a fifth intruded with, "Hallelujah, praise be the Lord," sung to a completely different tune. The comedy of childhood knows no boundaries. The same child who couldn't repeat the holy gibberish to save his life suddenly becomes the master of a 5-ring circus. Each ring is a sacred moment in time, but together what he hears is a symphony space in Hebrew, Aramaic, a pastiche of Jewish prayer, which invites the adult reader to sing along. Unser Schulhof is in Ganzen kemat ein Schul. Sommer, als die Fenster seien offen und ihr geht vorbei, beschas mit Davend, weißt ihr nicht, was ihr sollt tun? Ihr sollt bleiben stehen und springen Kedusche, ihr sollt sich unbeugen, chappen aborechu, ihr sollt entfernen, Amen, Yehei, Shmei Rabbo. Beschas von ein Seit hört sich ein Gesang, Oz Yoshir Moshe, Schreit Emetzer von der Seite, Echod! Fällt einer herein plötzlich mit einem Nicken von der Gemorre. Miklol, shehu tzarich lifrot, umifprat, shehu tzarich liklal. Schluckt ihm über noch einer mit einem Nicken, Yisgadal v'Yisgadash, Shemei Rabo. Kommt zu gehen, a Dritter, und lasst euch miteinander tun. Halleluja, Halleluja. To be honest, this many-layered passage was probably not taught to us in the Volksschule. And to be even more honest, I could not have made sense of it until I became a shul-going Jew in my early 20s. The Schulhof is surround sound. Childhood is one big carnival. 6 days of the week, the Schulhof hosts a marketplace, while on the Sabbath, wonder of wonders, it's a deliverance for children. Our synagogue courtyard had two different faces, one for weekdays and one for Sabbath and holidays. During the week, it was a marketplace for Jewish books, prayer shawls, ritual fringes and mezuzahs, rotten apples, unripe little pears, sunflower seeds and beans, poppy seed and squares, bagels and sugar cookies. Goats chewing their cud and wagging their beards sunned themselves as though on a private estate. But comes the Sabbath and holidays, gone is the marketplace, gone are the goats. Jews, God grant them good health, gathered in little circles and began talking and wagging their tongues, discussing local and worldwide events of recent and ancient vintage. Children and schoolboys milled about. Talmud Torah youngsters on various classes ran, leaped about, and weaved in and out of the groups of people like fish in water. Sabbath was God's gift to them. They were as free as birds. All this is but a lead-in to Koppela's incantation of joy on the night of Shmini Atzeret, when he arrives on the scene with the perfect flag held up by the straightest stick, with the tallest candle atop the reddest apple, when even Ulick's flag can't hold a candle to his, when all his saving and scrimping finally pay off. He can hardly be blamed, or can he, for a moment of hubris. Koppel, he said, where did you get such a fine stick?
What did you say?
I asked, looking up. Where did you find such a cute little stick?
Why do you ask? I said. Want to swap it for your nail?
Ulick gets the dig and takes revenge. He whispers something to Nehemiah, the lame boy, who saddles up to Koppela, asks for a light from his candle, and in an instant, Koppela's flag goes up in flames. When catastrophe strikes, this is what Koppela's inner world looks like. Had a stone fallen from the sky and struck my head? Had a wild beast attempted to devour me? Had a corpse dressed in a tattered shroud sought to choke me? My fright would not have been as great as it was when I saw my naked stick and the burnt-out flag. No longer are the voices of good and evil equally matched. No longer can he conjure up all the sights and sounds of the Schulhof. No longer is he one of the boys dancing about and yelling for joy. At this moment, he experiences a catalog of horrors. It is literally his worst nightmare. I came home alone, without a flag. I found a dark corner and sat down, my head between my knees, and wept softly so that no one would notice. And I asked God a question. Is it fair, O eternal Lord? Did I deserve it? Why did you do this to me? Always the object of ridicule, always left to fend for himself, Coppola now feels abandoned, even by God. Is this the end? Not quite. For, as so often happens in the stories of Sholem Aleichem, there's not one ending, but two. In both, Koppel, the adult, takes over from Coppola, the child, and reassumes the soothing, retrospective voice we heard at the beginning. The happy ending goes like this. But since today is the eve of a holiday, and on a holiday, especially on Simchas Torah, we have to be merry and gay, I'd like to end the story of my flag on a happy note. Since when is today the eve of a holiday? Well, it turns out that the comedy of childhood is not only about the holidays, it is also pegged to the holiday calendar. Writing for Der Yid, Sholem Aleichem made it his business to supply holiday-related stories for each of the Jewish festivals. So the Fon came out in 2 installments on November 1st and 8th, right on the heels of the holiday season. Whether or not they observed the festival, urban readers from then until the present day came to expect that their favorite newspaper would run a story, somehow pegged to that holiday. We have Sholem Aleichem to thank for perfecting the genre of holiday stories for children of all ages. As I said, there are 2 endings. The plot summary of the happy ending goes like this. Our child hero falls into delirium and has 1 foot in the grave. The butchers in his father's shul mobilize their prayers on his behalf. But by the next Simchas Torah, all is well. His dreams and his flag have all been restored. The end. The Dick and Jane ending, the too good to be true ending. Then there's another ending for readers of Yiddish. Children, you know that all stories either have sad or happy endings. For the most part, Jewish stories have sad endings. According to one of our proverbs, a Jew, especially a poor one, is not destined to have pleasure. Much can be said about this. When you grow up, you'll understand. The Jewish ending spells out the poetics of storytelling. It lays bare the deep structure of Jewish life. Jewish stories, may they begin in communal laughter and celebration, will most likely end with disappointment and pain. How could one make it through this crazy carnival of life? How to cope with these cycles of shattered dreams and expectations? Through stories that are both mythic and mundane, that expose the joys and terrors of childhood, the pain, the humiliation, the ridicule, alongside the celebration, the surround sound, and the momentary escape from reality. Through a storyteller who has lived to tell the tale, and through his paper flag, more coveted, more precious than anything else in the world, crafted out of salvaged objects, a wooden stick, some kosher wax, an apple in season, a piece of folk art embellished with a few Hebrew words. Degel Machane Ephraim, Degel Machane Yehuda, Sisu v'simchu b'simchas Torah. And yet, so fragile, so vulnerable, so exposed. It seems that Sholem Aleichem designed these stories, this comedy of childhood, to inoculate us against unforeseen disasters, so that when catastrophe strikes, on the happiest day of the Jewish calendar, Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah, we won't be taken completely by surprise.